So now I'd love to introduce to you our presenters for today, both of whom are also Extension Master Gardener interns. First, Fatima Muhammad grew up in New York, and she's been an avid gardener for as long as she can remember. She's currently maintaining a plot in the organic Chinkapin Community Garden in Alexandria, and she's passionate about household plants, vegetables, herbs, and native plants. She's grown grapevines in her backyard in New York. She's taught her children how to garden in Georgia, and she bartered hot peppers with her neighbors in Trinidad. So she's had the opportunity to grow all types of plants throughout her life in lots of different climates and conditions. Overall, her love for her native Caribbean cuisine has always shaped what she chooses to grow, and her garden expresses that culture. As a Master Gardener intern, she's now learning how science can be applied behind the things that she does intuitively. Our second presenter is Kristen Moon. She's originally from New Hampshire, and she started vegetable gardening as a young child. Her family taught her the importance of self-provisioning, and both her mother and her grandmother canned fruits and vegetables every summer. And when she moved to Virginia, she returned to her roots and started a small vegetable garden of her own now. And she doesn't have the time for canning at the moment, but she does like to freeze the products of her labor and give them to her neighbors. Her love of vegetable gardening also influences her day job. She's a professor of history and American studies, and she teaches classes on American food. So welcome, Kristen and Fatima. And Kristen, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you now to get us started with the presentation.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, for that introduction. Last week, we covered points 1 through 4. Those points were really about all the planning required to get a vegetable garden up and running. So we talked about locations, the physical requirements, how to lay out a garden, and then the various supplies that you need, whether we're talking about equipment, seeds, or transplants. Today, we're talking about getting those seeds and plants in the ground and then reaping the benefits of getting those seeds and plants in the ground and avoiding some of the pitfalls that you might encounter, including various weeds, bugs and insects, and then some of the plant diseases that are very common in our region. Let's talk about planting your garden. So here, what you see before you is a month-by-month planting schedule. We're in February, and especially in Northern Virginia, we really aren't doing much in the garden, although this week has me confused, and maybe some of you confused. It's been so warm that I was hoping to be preparing my beds for seeds, but I think this weekend we're going to see a turn back to winter. By March, we're going to really get out and about, start preparing our soils, some of our cooler season plants, get those outside, start some of our seedlings, especially if we are doing some cool weather transplants, get those started as well. By late March and early April, we can plant some of our additional cool weather crops. We can do some transplants and also think about mulching. And I'll talk a little bit about what mulching is in a little bit. For May, that's really the warm season in terms of our gardening plants. And you can usually use what we call the Mother's Day rule. So early to mid-May is often a good time to get those out and about. Finally, because we're in Virginia, we do have, relatively speaking, an extended growing season. So in mid to late August, and you got to pay attention to the weather because it can get a little too hot for this. You can put in a second round of cool weather crops in your garden, and then you can harvest in October and into even November. This past year, I had tomatoes into October and early November as well. They just kept on producing because I think the weather was just perfect for it. So that's one way to sort of think about planting. Another is to think about soil temperature. Soil temperature is key to the germination of seeds. And it's important to note that if it's too cold or too wet, sometimes your seeds will not germinate, and quite frankly, they might even rot in the ground. But notice here, some of our seed can really handle a lot of cooler temperatures. So look at the lettuce and look at some of the other leafy greens, your spinach. They can handle 35 degrees as a minimum. But that said, notice that they also have maximums. As it gets hotter, it often can get harder for plants to germinate. So you really want to hit that sweet spot, that optimum range, anywhere in the 60s through the low to mid 80s. Some of our more warm season can handle, of course, much hotter temperatures. Now, for a beginner, I don't really recommend that you buy a soil thermometer and I've never tried it, but I'm pretty sure you can't use other thermometers for soil temperature. So there's another way to think about when to best put your plants in, and that is a planting chart. We actually sent everybody who's on this call a planting chart. I have taken that data out related to planting and just put it in this format just to make it easier to read on Zoom. As you probably noticed, it's kind of hard to read with all the fine print on it. So here I've broken it up in terms of cool and warm weather crops. You can see some of our earliest items: onions, peas, spinach. You can do in basically a week or two, especially here in Northern Virginia. Some of our later items, such as broccoli or cauliflower, you're going to wait until the end of March and early April, again, weather permitting. Also notice amongst our cool weather crops that a lot of them are leafy greens, or they're some sort of root vegetable that you can put in the ground because it's warm, but not too warm. The exception, of course, is the broccoli and cauliflower. In terms of our warm weather crops, you see a lot of things that grow on vines and above ground that tend to thrive in warmer weather. The one exception is sweet potato. Sweet potato, depending on where in the world we are talking about, it tends to be a warmer tuber, similar to, say, a malanga or a boniato. These are tubers that definitely thrive in warmer climates. One of the first things to do, no matter what, is to read your seed packet. So if you're planting seeds, that is your go-to to understand what you should do in terms of seeds. That will provide information on how deep that seed needs to be placed into the ground, what sort of water requirements it might have, as well as sun. And again, you will find usually full or part sun for most of the seeds that you'll be putting in your vegetable garden. For your transplants, there's really two types of transplants you might be working with. Some you will have grown yourself, and there's some particular issues that you will face if you're growing your own transplants, and some you can buy at your local garden center. Here is a breakdown of ease of use in terms of transplants. I love doing tomatoes as transplants because I grew up in northern New England, where we have a much shorter growing season. I'll be honest, we only could do tomatoes as transplants. We had to start the seeds pretty early in the season, and then we had to wait until late May, early June to put them in, because otherwise we would never get tomatoes. I've also done peppers and green beans and peas. And even though it says here that beans and peas are more difficult, I've had a lot of success with them as long as they are large enough to handle anything that Mother Nature throws their way. Some of these others I haven't used, but I'm sure there are other folks on this call who have. In addition to figuring out which transplants are easier than others to use, it's also important that if you're making your own transplants, to harden them off. Hardening off is a process in which we acclimate a plant to being outdoors. Quite frankly, it's been kind of spoiled in your house. You might have grow lights, you have temperature control, you're watering it every day. It's the perfect situation. Mother Nature is not so kind, right? We have wind, we have hail, we have all sorts of things that will be thrown your plant's way. And that in order to get them prepared for that environment, it is helpful to get them acclimated. So to do that, you'll want to decrease the watering, stop any fertilizer, and then expose them to outdoor temperatures, which usually will be lower than what you have in your house. You can do maybe 1 or 2 hours at first, and then expand how long they spend outside over the course of, say, a week, depending on what your weather is, maybe longer, and then put them in the ground. If you've bought them at a garden center, usually they are already hardened off because they are outside. So you don't have to worry about that per se. That said, there are some best practices for transplanting. First and foremost, if you can, do it on a cloudy day. A cloudy day helps protect the plant from some of the shock that it will go through when it gets put in the ground. The sun can be pretty harsh on seedlings, and so a cloudy day just gives it a little extra protection. Make sure you also don't have your plant too high or too low, which can cause problems in terms of just overall development. And then finally, you'll want to give it a good soaking after you put it in the ground initially, and then check on it sort of every day to see how it's doing, if it needs maybe more water or less, because it will need a little extra support, at least early on. Some of the ways that you can organize your garden that are really popular, what we would argue are maybe the most rational ways to do this, is rows, bands, and mounds. So rows, basically a long strip where you put a little furrow, raise it up a little bit so it's very clearly demarcated, but also will have good drainage. If it's a long row, take 2 stakes, one end and then the other, and then a string to make sure you can create a straight line. My garden's not that big, and so I tend to eyeball it and do the best I can in terms of having straight rows. So mine are like 4 by 6. This is really for somebody who has a bigger garden per se. You can also use a seeder, which will help put seeds in sort of an equal distance, if that helps you as well. Bands are used for broadcasting, and usually this is an area that is a little wider than a row, and it's often something we use for some of our leafy greens, our spinaches, arugula, things like that. And then finally, mounds are really popular with your larger vegetables, your squashes, zucchinis, watermelons. And again, here, sort of mound it up, put a couple seeds in the top. With the mound, you know that there are seeds there, and of course, it helps promote some drainage. For containers, you also need to think about how you're putting them into those containers, and especially if you're using seeds, and do they have enough sun? Do they have enough space? Space in containers, of course, is a key issue. Some plants, for example, like your tomatoes, your eggplant, and your cucumbers, they really need a big container. 5 gallons, which is basically a paint bucket that you can get at any hardware store, is perfect. And with that, you might also need to add some sort of either trellis, right, or cage to help support the plant as well. For some of your smaller vegetables, you can do smaller containers. Carrots, we have 1 quart here. Honestly, that's probably not big enough, especially if you want to do a lot of carrots. I would definitely go a bigger container, but also deep container, right? Anything that's a root, you want to think about how deep you need that container to be to make sure you can have the maximum size of whatever that fruit or vegetable is. Spacing and thinning. So again, making sure that your plants or seeds or transplants are well spaced is critical to the success of your gardening. If they are too crowded, they will struggle to access water and nutrients, and then they will also be more likely to have diseases. So you want to make sure that you review the tags or the seed packets for any guidelines. In addition, you'll also need to think about doing some thinning. Now, thinning is used mostly with our smaller seed vegetables, ones that we often will either broadcast across an area, or if you do it in a row, you'll do them very close together. But to thin, make sure that you do not pull the small little plants out. If you do that, you're more than likely to actually pull additional plants that you want to actually have in the ground. So instead, we recommend that you use scissors to cut those out. And then finally, mulching. I mentioned mulching earlier on. Mulching is really critical to the success of your garden in terms of managing weeds, to help with any sort of temperature or water variation, especially when you get in the hot summer months. It will help the plants with that. It can protect them from different critters that might be out and about in your yard. And because they are organic, they will slowly break down in your garden and add to the nutrients in your soil. In general, people tend to use mulch that is made of straw, leaves, wood chips. And these are the types of mulch that we also use in other gardens in our yards. You can use grass clippings or food scraps. There is plastic mulch out there. I would not recommend using it because it doesn't break down. It's not really good for the environment. And of course, it doesn't add some of the nutrients, et cetera, to the soil. So the takeaways for section 5 is to think about timing for your plants. What is the best time to put them into the ground? Some of the issues that are particular to certain seeds and transplants, spacing, thinning, and mulching, all of which will help you in terms of overall success with your vegetable garden. Do we have any questions from the chat?
One from Audrey. Are pine needles recommended for mulch use?
You can use pine needles, and I know a lot of people that do. I actually have several pine trees in my yard, and so I let them sort of do their natural thing and sort of self-mulch. If you have them in your yard, that's a great way to reuse what you already have.
Are there any good starter kits for seedlings out there, or is that something you would recommend?
I'm sure there are. I tend to just use containers that I have around my house. I actually like yogurt containers to use for seedlings, but I know a lot of folks will use peat pots. Some people will make little pots out of newspaper, which will also biodegrade. So that's another easy thing to do, because then you can put the container as well as the dirt that it's growing in into your yard. I mean, I'm a big fan of just reusing stuff I have as opposed to buying stuff.
And two more questions came through. How about pine tree wood chips? Would the same principles apply there as the other types of mulch?
Yeah, I believe so. You might also want to just check what's available. I know like a lot of folks further south tend to use pine. I don't know if there are particular diseases or bugs that you might want to be careful with some of these pine chips. And I know different types of mulches can induce certain types of pests, termites, for example, which I've had experience with. So you'll just need to be careful with that.
And then one additional question is, can you transplant earlier with raised beds because the soil temperature might be increased?
In theory, but you know, the weather is so, dare I say, wackadoodle here in Northern Virginia. I just be careful with that. And if you have a soil thermometer, I mean, that would definitely help. You could also argue because it's a raised bed, it might also have more exposure to air, which can also cool it at night. So that's something to be cognizant of as well.
Well, we have one final question. You have more information on any types of mulch that are associated with termites?
I got wood mulch, just general wood mulch from one of our local garden centers. And I, unbeknownst to me, ended up with termites. You will want to check for termites in your mulch. Apparently it's a common phenomenon. It was a general wood mulch. I don't believe it was pine. I don't know if that helps or not, but yeah, it's something I've seen.
All right, I think that's all the questions we have for now, so we're probably ready to go on.
Thank you, Kristen. So the next section I'm going to discuss are how do you control your weeds, pests, and diseases. And all of this ties back into all the good practices we talked about from part 1 of this 2-day presentation. Weeds are simply plants that we do not want in our garden. It's not that we don't want them just because they're weeds, but they can have a negative impact on your yield. They can take away nutrients from your soil, such as water. They can impact the amount of light that your plants are receiving. And it can be extremely costly because they impact your yield. You may have to replace those crops. So it's not just that we want to get down on our hands and knees and dig them out. There's a reason for it. After all the hard work of planting crops, you want to reap the benefit of what you sowed. So on this slide are some common weeds that we find here in Northern Virginia. I know there are other folks from across the nation on this call, so some of these weeds may be common in your area also. It's important as you look at the weeds in your garden that you learn the life cycle of the weeds and identify the weeds. I once or twice have pulled a plant because I thought it was a weed. So you have annual weeds such as your crabgrass and your parsley. They have really shallow roots. For example, your perennial weeds such as your dandelions, they have very deep roots. So you need to really be able to dig up those deep-rooted weeds. Right now in Northern Virginia, here in Alexandria, it's raining today. So I wish it wasn't so cold, because after this meeting, I would probably go out and pull some weeds. It's an ideal time to be pulling weeds. We have some folks that also like to eat certain weeds. Certain weeds are edible, such as your wild garlic. I've had a couple of wild garlic in my plot in one particular bed, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. So I definitely started pulling them because it was impacting the other things I wanted to grow in that particular plot. If you remember in part 1, we talked about different tools, and I talked a little bit about the hari tool, which again means dig in Japanese. that you should use to dig deep. You need to really get down to the root of the problem. So let's just go through a couple of important tips for weed control. The first thing is you need to identify the type of weed, because you don't want to pull, let's say, your leeks and find out later that that's what you did. You also want to gain an understanding of the different life cycles. Some of the weeds may be perennial, some may be annual type weeds. And you also have weeds that grow underground and they have these rhizomes, roots that you want to definitely dig deep and remove. And another important thing about weeds is you want to minimize the spread, and you don't want them to go to seeds and the seeds disperse and just become this massive issue for you throughout your entire garden. So as you dig up your weeds, you also don't want to create too much disturbance, because then you may again be increasing the problem. In the community I'm in, we have these walkways around your individual plots. And you want to dig up the weeds in those areas also, because those weeds will eventually trickle into your plot. And as you dig them up, you want to cover up that space. And you can use a variety of things to cover up those weeds, to kind of smother stuff out, such as mulch or straw, to cover the walkways, to prevent them from getting into your plot. I tend to cover with newspaper or cardboard. I also use the weed blocker cloth, and then I put wood chips on top of that to help within my plot and around the walkways. So most importantly, don't let them go to seeds. Pull them before that occurs. As with anything else in life, when I was thinking about prevention as opposed to reaction, the same thing goes for weeds. If you think about it's raining today, you should probably put on a raincoat and other things to prevent catching a cold. Well, establishing your garden is some of the best practices we talked about already in regards to space, diversifying what you put in your garden. Those are good practices for prevention of weeds, not just with weeds. When I talk about disease and other pests in your garden, it's also a very good prevention measure. And the diversification of your garden with flowers that attract pollinators and beneficial insects, it also helps combat weeds and combat more pests when I get to that section. So monitor your garden regularly and look for evidence of weeds, and just don't let it get out of control. And you can see pictures on this slide of some diversity, especially in that third picture there, that can help not give weed space to grow. We also have a fruit orchard in the community garden. And earlier in the year I went by and I noticed some weeds in a particular patch. And then I was there probably last week and I see that those weeds have spread. And preparing for this presentation, I was thinking, my goodness, what has happened here? But then I remember that we did have some bare areas there. There was some grass seeds thrown there, but they probably didn't take. So therefore the weeds took over. So avoid having those bare patches in your gardens, be it home, community garden, wherever you're gardening. All right, now let's talk about a different kind of pest. These are different pests that can impact your crop. And again, identification is key. You don't want to treat a problem and you haven't properly identified the cause. So it's important that you do identification. And if you don't know how to identify or know what you have as an issue, please, please, please reach out to our help desk. We're there to help. I've had experience with some of the pests on this particular slide, in particular, the bean beetles. So the larvae and adults feed on the underside of your leaves between the veins, and they remove the lower epidermis of the leaves. You can actually squash the eggs and pick off the adult beetles. I've tried the squashing and the picking before, and also disposing of them in soapy water. but you have to catch it early. So if you see something, don't leave it and think, oh, I could come back, because within no time, they would have taken over your entire crop. The Harlequin bug, they like to feed on broccoli, cabbage, kale, and occasionally other vegetables. So not only the identification is important, it's also important to know what each of these pests like to feed on, because some of them have their food preferences, just as we have our preferences. They do too. It's amazing. Everything in nature plays its role. And you have also the squash bug. I've heard of different strategies that folks use for the squash bug, such as foil or toilet tissue tubes the inside when they're planting to avoid the squash bug from getting to their crop. Just real quick, we'll just talk a little bit about the striped and the spotted cucumber beetle. And they too have their preference. The striped cucumber prefer primarily the cucumbers, then the spotted like cucumbers, but they also feed on all parts of the plant, not just the leaves. The larva has its role of killing things. The adult, they prefer to feed on the leaves, petals, etc. of the plant. So don't assume that everything in your garden is a pest. Last week, we also discussed that you have your beneficial insects, and they too play a role. So it's important that you recognize these insects and not inadvertently remove them from the garden. There are over 400 lady beetles that play a really positive role in nature. And you also have your parasitic wasps and your hoverflies. So the wasps, for example, they eat other insects from the inside out. It may sound a little gross, but it's really an amazing part of nature that occurs. And then the hoverfly, they resemble a bee. So you can inadvertently think that they are bees, but they are not. They have two wings, which is very different than your flies or bees. If you want to learn more about beneficial insects, Kristen talked earlier about Donna and Susan's upcoming presentation, which I myself plan to attend. They're going to go into more information at an advanced level of your beneficial insects. Pest management. Every year, Virginia Tech publishes this integrated pest management guide. And also on our site, we have this phenomenal site called Beating the Bug. And it's a monthly guide where you can find information and charts and resources regarding various bugs that, because of their life cycle, they're more prevalent during certain times of year, can help with the identification of bugs. So please, please, please reference that, reference our pest management guide. And sometimes by planning later in the season, it was really interesting to hear some of the questions earlier today. Sometimes delaying a little bit can also help miss the life cycle of the bug, and therefore these particular pests don't have a chance to impact your crop. All right, now we're going to talk about common garden visitors. We as humans, we have to learn to live collaboratively with other wildlife. And how do we do that successfully and grow our vegetables that we want to eat? And also, we have other members of the community that may want to eat our crop. So what do we do to find a balance and think about what's tolerable as far as prevention in that aspect? You have various type of birds, for example, such as your blue jays and your crows. They like to visit our garden and perhaps munch on our tomatoes as they begin to ripen because of the moisture that they may have. And I know some gardeners may have bird baths or other things at home where they can visit those as opposed to visiting our crops. But please keep in mind mosquitoes and leaving standing water around and the location in which you have those. You want to make sure it's a safe environment for the birds and a safe environment for other members of the community. I typically don't cover my plant rows, but I know other gardeners tend to cover their plant rows. And this also helps with those ground feeder birds and others that may be looking to enjoy your salad bar plants that you're growing. So those are just some strategies. There are a lot of other strategies out there for some of the common visitors to our plots. And just remember, sometimes if you remove one thing from the environment, it may impact the growth of another particular species in the environment. We're going to talk just a little bit about our four-legged visitors, such as our deer and our rabbits and chipmunks. For the deer, fencing is always an option. Probably about 3 years ago, I put up a fence around my plot. It's about, I would say about six feet high. And I think it's had a positive impact on preventing deer from coming into my plot. But the benefit of being in a community garden, you may have others around you who have put up fencing. If you're gardening at home, some gardeners may have tried other mechanical type devices or detectors to prevent the deer from attacking their crop. Just remember that they will jump. And I have even seen deer go through fencing at the community plot and knock things down if they really, really want to get to your crop. Something else I do is I plant a diverse array of plants in my garden, not just for pollination, but also they may call them deer resistant type plants, such as marigolds and other perennials that help. I also have lavender, mint, oregano, and thyme in my garden plot, and I believe that has played a role in helping prevent some of my sharing, for lack of a better way to put it, with the deer. If you have issues with rabbits, you need to put your fencing or wiring, whatever you're doing, at least 2 feet high and perhaps at least 6 to 12 inches underground to help prevent some of that. Last year, I think we had an increased problem in the community with chipmunks. So I just wonder what impacted that? Why did we have such an increase in chipmunks? What happened in the ecosystem for that to occur? Let's talk a little bit about some common diseases that attack our plant. And again, prevention is the key here. Kristen was talking about spacing and thinning, and I talked about diversifying with other plants in your garden. All of those things for prevention are better than having to treat a particular issue in your garden. So good garden practices bring about healthy plants. Tomatoes, because I would think probably almost everyone on this call plants some species or variety of tomatoes in their garden. And not just tomatoes get these diseases, but tomatoes tend to be the ones sometimes that can be heavily impacted. So the septoria, the leaf spot, initial symptoms are the yellowing of the older leaves. And I want to say this before I forget. If you want us to help or to help us to help with identification, if you live in other areas, please check out your local extension offices, because I'm sure they do exactly the same type of work serving the community. Don't just bring in a leaf, an infected leaf. You have to also bring in a sample of something that's not infected so we can compare and contrast. So it's not just about vegetables. We're also referring to different types of plants, household plants, et cetera, that, or trees even outside that may be infected. Call the help desk, find out what type of sample, how do you bring in the sample so you can get a really good answer to go back and perhaps treat and or prevent when you plant the same type of vegetable garden again. So for example, the Fusarium wilt, the leaves will start to turn yellow and go downward and start to droop. A lot of folks deal with the early or light blight. There is a difference between the two. So you need to be familiar with the spots that may enlarge or show like a concentric type ring, ridges in a bullseye pattern. So I cannot stress the importance of knowing your plants and knowing which plants are susceptible to which types of diseases, and also prevention. Last week, we were chatting after, and we talked about the proper watering of plants to avoid soil beating up on your plants, the type of mulch, or just putting mulch around the base of your plants, especially your tomatoes, when you're planting. So all of those things are really critical. When you look at the downy or the powdery mildew, know that those are two different types. The downy mildew, they tend to affect leaves and they become yellowish or speckled. The leaf edges may also curl downward. And then some of these, the powdery, may also infect plants such as peas, beans, your okra, your cucumber, your squash. So prevention by good garden practices, when things happen, identification before treatment, and at the end, make sure even when you're removing these plants, if you get to that point, that you're not throwing them in your mulch, so you don't reintroduce them into your garden. Last week, we also discussed, even when you're buying transplants, make sure you're not buying plants that are infected. Kristen talked just a few minutes ago about the mulch, inspecting the things that you buy that you're going to introduce into your garden to prevent issues later on. Okay, buying disease-resistant variations is also important. Please note that the resource document that you receive, it has all of these links that are in the deck. They're in that resource document. And again, reach out to the help desk and be aware and know how, just in general, how to get help. Okay, so let's talk about some takeaways. I mentioned the possibility of delaying the planting date may also help miss the life cycle of a particular pest. You may also want to do the floating rows, cover your crops, plant diverse and variant resistance types of plants, learn to recognize the beneficial insects so you don't inadvertently remove them, let them play their role in nature. Plant more diverse plants and perennials and native plants to your area. All right, and have fun. Just know the things that I presented as far as disease, pests, and weeds. This is just an overview. This is not all inclusive. There are so many resources out there. I highly encourage everyone to have a lot of fun with gardening. Every year is an experiment. One year you may get an abundance amount of crop for one particular species, and then next year something may happen in the environment. Even here in Northern Virginia, where we have 180 days almost of wonderful opportunities for gardening. The season varies. We haven't, but I'm exaggerating a little bit. We could have snow tomorrow. So that's just Northern Virginia and the way it works here. And it's garden as we go with the flow.
Well, Fatima, we do have one question for you that just popped up.
Okay.
Any tips for prevention of slugs in the garden?
Oh, just make sure you're not overwatering. Go back to that and creating an extra moist environment. You know how things grow in moist environments. I recommend a moisture meter. They're really cheap. You can get them almost anywhere. That's my recommendation. Don't overwater. A lot of time gardeners overwater and create these environments.
Anything on treatment for slugs beyond the watering, if you do see them in the garden?
I don't have any specific suggestions, but I check out integrated pest management. Prevention is the key. Prevention.
Someone has a question about if you have a dog that's getting into your garden, are there any suggestions that you have for preventing that?
I would suggest training your dog. If it's your dog, perhaps put up maybe a lower type fencing around your garden. And I would also be really cautious of dog feces in your garden, just thinking about the chemical makeup, the physical makeup of your garden. And don't forget to test your garden if there are other feces and other things getting into your garden plot.
One other question about soil management. Are there any preventive measures or amendments that could be done to the soil to prevent pests or maybe diseases, I guess, that also were a problem last year?
So let's just go back to soil overall. Well, first testing your soil and then making sure you're not over fertilizing, or if you get recommendations for your soil, that you're adhering to those recommendations and not putting things in your soil that are not needed, making sure you're planting a diverse array of plants and vegetables in your garden. You're not leaving a lot of bare space, but you're not overcrowding. You have to find that equilibrium, that balance. Know what type of soil you have. Is it heavily clay packed or is it not?
And then one additional question is, somebody's interested in growing grapes and fruit trees. And since we mentioned about your bio, Fatima, that you have experience growing both, do you have any guidance for somebody who wants to get started with those crops?
There's a lot of information out there, and the person could check our website. And I will tell you this, we had grapevines in my backyard in New York. And then when we moved from overseas and moved back to the States, to Georgia, my kids were literally just eating grapes on the back deck and dumping the seeds. And we end up with muscadines and other things just growing over the deck. And if you think about the different soil there and the change in temperature in New York, the different soil. And then here in Alexandria, we do have a couple of folks that are growing grapes right here in Chicopin in Alexandria successfully. And one of the gentlemen I know, he uses the same type of soil treatment as far as horse manure and other soil amenities, and has really nice grapes. But there also we have fig trees throughout the garden, probably too many, that are grown just in the basic soil that's there in the community. And we also have some fruit trees that are planted there, and there are no extreme or extraordinary amenities that are particularly done to the soil. We keep mulch and stuff around it, but I would suggest even reaching out to the help desk and having additional conversation. We have resources that we can provide.
I think that's all the questions we have for now. So we're probably ready to get going on to the next section.
Now, this is the most exciting section, because not that we're almost at the end of our 2-day presentation. This is step 7, and it's the most exciting piece of the presentation because you are now going to harvest your crop. You're going to harvest all the wonderful vegetables that you have grown. Harvesting also at the right time is critical because you will reap the nutritional benefit of that plant. Because sometimes if you harvest too soon or too late, you may miss out on some of the nutritional benefit of the plant. On this slide, there are some examples. This slide and the next 2 or 3 slides, I'm just going to talk about certain types of plants, some good harvesting practices and tips to help you embrace all of that good stuff that you've planted. For example, know what type of greens you're planting. I like to plant butter greens, and with those, you're going to cut the entire head of the plant. But then you have other greens where you could probably start cutting the outer leaves. And certain plants, the more you harvest, the more you get. The roots vegetables, such as your carrots, your beets, your radish, those things, you're going to kind of dig down and test where the soil is. You want it probably a little moist before you harvest those vegetables. I'm just going to go through a couple of good harvesting practices. And I think one of the most important ones is harvesting early in the morning, not at noon. And if you can't get out until noon, I would suggest waiting to the next morning to harvest. The earlier of the day, the better. Okay. You should also think about the coolness of the day. Once you harvest and you got those perishable vegetables at home, make sure you rinse them off. And if they require to be cooled, that you get them in the refrigerator. When you harvest them, make sure in your harvest basket, whatever you're putting them in, you're not putting your heavy squash and melons and stuff on top of your greens, because then you're going to get home and you're going to be really disappointed. Also, if you leave some of those things out, like your greens, you're going to get home if you wait and go do other chores without addressing them immediately, may start to wilt. So it's important that you address them immediately. Just a few more tips here. Harvesting when vegetables are young, they may also be more tender. Sweet peppers tend to taste better when they are harvested later, when they are mature. As a general rule, when you look at your vegetables and you say it's time to take it, it's time to take it and harvest them. You can find endless harvesting guides online. You can also look at the packaging on your seed and just use your overall best judgment. Other things to consider when harvesting, just think of all of the proper tools. Don't try to twist your zucchini and squash, for example, off of the plant. Use the proper tool to cut them off. And the same thing with your green beans. Those plants, you just don't want to do it. You may damage the plant from producing more vegetables, and you may not get exactly what you want. I tend to use my carrot greens for garnishings, or even cutting up my beet greens. If I'm growing a variety, I may cook one pot with different vegetables in them. So diversify what you're picking, and how you're using it. Try not to waste any part of the plant, and just, there's so many different cooking books out there that you can use to diversify how you're cooking, how you're preparing your food. It can be really beautiful on a plate, especially if you're planting a diverse of vegetables that have different colors. It just makes your plate a little bit more attractive. And if you have vegetables such as your okra, tomato, and you have abundant amount of those items, please consider donating them to a food bank and or giving them to neighbors. This past year, I think a couple of times, Kristen or myself have mentioned we had a lot of tomatoes last season. At the end of the season, I had some Better Boys and other tomatoes that I just had to get them out of the garden. I took them and put them in an Amazon box, again, just recycle and sealed the box. And within days, I may open the box and there's this wonderful, wonderful red tomato ready to eat. Also, know what type of variety of plant you have, especially with those, because you may harvest them and they may have other colors, and I've just placed them in my windowsill as opposed to just leaving them in the garden. I think we've gone through enough of when to harvest. Timing is critical, and the various tips of how to harvest. And knowing the type of vegetable that you plant will dictate when you should harvest. And most importantly, have fun and enjoy it. Okay, so we're going to do a brief recap of everything we've covered, part 1, day 1, through today, up to step 7. Just want to revisit some really, really key things. And I encourage all of the participants on, as we go through this, please feel free to jot something that you're going to take away and that you are going to change or continue to do. Perhaps some of the things we talked about validated what you're doing already, and maybe you have learned one thing. I believe in every situation, no matter what we do throughout our day, there should be something you can reflect on that you learn in that particular day. So Kristen, if you want to come back on, let's go through this last steps together. So the first thing we talked about was picking your location. We talked about sunlight, proper drainage, containers, raised beds. Kristen, do you want to call out anything else in that area?
Just make sure you think about what is the best plant for the location and what are you capable of doing with the space and time that you have.
The next step we talked about was preparing and caring your soil. I could say 2 words: soil test, soil test, soil test, soil test, repeatedly.
And also compost. I'm a big fan of compost. Again, it's a great thing to help the environment and also helps your garden, and it limits waste. We all have vegetable and fruit scraps from our kitchens that we can use.
Awesome. Okay, step 3, we talked about plan your garden layout. Know what vegetables you like to eat, you like to grow. You may not be able to do everything because of spacing, and refer back to the planning chart from the presentation last week till today, and Ben put it in the chat. We gave you that Northern Virginia Zone 7 NOVA planning chart. If you are on and you live in a different area, you may be in a different zone, you may be in Zone 7, just know what zone you're in, know what's the best time to plant certain vegetables, and be patient with yourself. We all get excited about gardening. I would hate for you to plant something and it's not the correct time of year and you don't get any crop, or you have to go back and purchase more things. Gardening can be a very expensive process. And if you need to obtain structures or support, so know your plant, okay? And also ways to increase your yield. The next step 4, obtaining seeds, plants, equipment, and supplies. Review the packet information, the suggested dates for planning for a while. There was something that came up too, I want to revisit just briefly from last week. There was a question about how long seeds. I went back, I looked at my seeds, and I was talking to a fellow gardener. I have seeds that I've obtained from our extension office from 2019 that I just threw out probably last summer, because when I used them, I didn't reap any crop from it. And right now in my seed collection, I have my seed collection in the container based on time of year. I have seeds in there where on the package, it has the manufacturer production date, and it also has average number of years. Know that that is an average, that seeds can last beyond just 1 year. Learn to share and swap your seeds. You're not going to plant the number of seeds unless you have a lot of land, and some of you may have huge gardens where you're going to use 1 pack of seeds. And then I've never done this, but a fellow gardener gave me a tip about if you have had the seeds for a while, you can use a paper towel and put the seed and wet it and see if it starts to germinate. So you want to be able to use everything that you purchase. In regards to equipment, again, don't go buy out Home Depot and other stores. Think about what you're going to do, what you're going to plant, and the tools that you need. And most importantly, protect yourself. Make sure you're using sunscreen, you have the proper gloves, you have wiki fabric, long sleeve and long pants. Don't take your own health for granted. Know if you have allergies, know if you're allergic to stuff such as poison ivy. Kristen, anything?
So I just wanted to add that if you're in Arlington, there is a tool lending library through the public library, which I think is a great novel idea. If you're in Arlington, instead of purchasing brand new equipment, try them out and see what works for you, save a little money, and then figure out what you actually need to purchase maybe later on, or continue just using what they call the shed. It's not open until the spring, so probably next month, but it is available. You can look at it online and see what tools they have.
All right, thank you. And then step 5, plant your garden. Spacing, thinning, mulching, know whether you're going to do seeds or transplant. One thing I will say here about transplant, just check the leaves, pull it out in a little container to make sure the roots aren't all stuck up in there. Think about those things. Kristen, you want to add?
And read the tags, read the seed packets. Those are your best guides, no matter what. We can give broad guidelines, but each company, each variety or cultivar has very specific needs. Those are the best places to find that information.
Step 6, control your weeds, pests, and disease. The key thing with controlling your weeds, pests, and disease is prevention and then identification. I just had another thought. If you're using containers and you've used those containers over a period of time, and one particular year your plant was diseased or it had pests, make sure you're cleaning that container before you use it again the next season. And not just cleaning your containers, but clean your tools. Clean your tools and make sure you're keeping them sharp.
And if you're pulling out things like poison ivy, shower. and put those clothes in the laundry, you're going to get it on other things and you might get rashes from it. I learned the hard way that I have particular plants that really bother my skin. And so when I garden near them or under them, I have to wear long sleeves. That's part of the learning process as well. So it's just something to be cognizant of. And you might not know what it is, because when we talk about things like allergies, we talk about it in terms of food. We don't necessarily think about it in terms of environmental factors or plants. So just be aware, if you start getting weird, itchy rashes, that it's probably something environmental.
Thank you for saying that. Last week, I shared with you guys that I've been gardening for a while, and it wasn't until last year I started breaking out in these red welts, and I had no idea what. Come to find out, I had to go get that allergy test with those, I don't know how many sticks in my back, and now I'm allergic to 4 different types of weeds all of a sudden. So I always make sure I have on long sleeves now. I have a really garden hat, and I just go out and do my thing. And don't forget to stay hydrated. Okay, step 7, harvest at peak quality. Know the time you want to harvest your crop, and know what time the crop should be harvested, not just in day, but in duration of time in which it's grown. And most importantly, have fun. So overall, some of the tips that we talked about already are also on this particular slide. Again, just knowing your soil. A good house can't stand on a weak foundation. That applies to having a good garden. Cannot be grown on weak or undernourished soil. So please, please, please make sure you keep that in mind. Determine the drainage features of your garden. Earlier today, we were talking about growing carrots and making sure we have carrots in loosely planted soil. I've grown carrots before in compact soil and not really getting a good harvest. And then when I changed where and the type of location, I got a wonderful, wonderful harvest from their garden. So the right plant in the right place at the right time. So take advantage of all of those things.
So, and I'm going to help sort of finish this off for us and open it up for questions. Depending on where you're located, there are particular varieties and cultivars that are geared towards the different conditions that your area might have. So I know some folks on this call are in more arid areas. Some folks might have colder winters. My family back home, they have 2 feet of snow on the ground. And we have, dare I say, almost like a April shower going on right now in Northern Virginia. So pay attention to that. What I grew growing up, I don't usually grow down here in Virginia. Climate does matter, time of year, etc. Think about things like companion planting or intercropping as a way to both promote our pollinators by creating biomass, but also that they can get those pests that you don't want on your plants. Maybe they'll go nibble on those, or they might deter those, right? So intercropping and companion planting is a great way. Fatima was talking about all the different herbs that she grows in her garden. Those are often great deterrents for a lot of our 4-legged critters, although not our 2-legged critters. They'll come and visit anyways. So just something else to think about. Make sure you know your bugs. Some bugs might be creepy and gross, but they're actually beneficial to your garden. And you'll also want to make sure you know about your weeds. Some of our weeds are edible, and some of them are going to suffocate your vegetables. So you need to sort of weigh the options in terms of managing your weeds, your insects, and then of course, diseases. And I can't say enough about, if you think you have the disease, call the help desk. I am definitely no expert on diseases, but we do have people who know a lot about them that can provide guidance as to a diagnosis, and also what cultural practices that you can pursue in order to address that particular issue that you're facing. And then finally, make sure you do some crop rotation. Don't plant tomatoes in the same place every year. Mix it up a little bit. For one thing, it sort of spices up your garden a little bit, but also it helps promote different types of nutrients. It addresses some of the pathogens and other elements of your soil when you move your plants around. We didn't talk about things like cover crops, but I believe Susan and Donna will be. That's definitely something to think about as you advance as a vegetable gardener. Finally, here's some of our contact information. So there's the email address for the help desk with the Master Gardener program. We also run a variety of plant clinics at the various farmers markets here in Arlington and in Alexandria. We also offer a variety of classes which are recorded and available on our website. We have programs at local libraries as well. And throughout this region, we have a variety of demonstration gardens too, each of which has their own special focus. Some focus on vegetables and fruit, some are more about native plants. So please check those out. And with that, I will open it up for any additional questions.
Okay, well, thank you all so much. We do have a couple of final questions here. 2 questions about why it's important to harvest in the morning, and then also what is the best time to water your vegetable garden?
Well, I'll take the latter first. It's probably the best time is probably to water in the morning or later in the evening, not at the height of the day, and not water and like this. I don't know if you guys can see my hand, watering where the water needs to go into the roots of the plant. And then the first question,
Why is it important to harvest in the morning?
for the nutritional value of the plant, you wait until later. You have to look at when photosynthesis occurs too. And that's the best time to harvest is earlier in the morning.
And then there was another question about delaying planting in order to avoid the life cycles of different pests. Could you just share a little bit more about that? Is there any specifics on how long you recommend delaying?
I'll tell you based on practice what I did last year. There are 2 plants I delayed, and it just happened that I delayed because life was happening. It was my cucumbers and some beans. And I probably delayed just because I couldn't get back out to the garden. I wasn't thinking about pests, but I learned through all of the yield that I reaped and the research and learning of coming through this program and preparing for this presentation that that's probably the reason why I was able to have cucumbers late until this season, and also with the green beans, because as I think about the different diseases that have attacked the variety of beans that I planted in my garden over the years just by life, I end up delaying a couple of weeks. And when I got those plants in, I was able to have a better crop. And I also changed the variety of plant that I was planting.
Okay, and one more question about seed saving. Someone on today's call has a large collection of seeds that they purchased, and they're wondering if it's good to place those seeds in the freezer for long-term storage. Would that be beneficial, or would that help prolong the life of those seeds at all?
I would say read the packet, because the packet will tell you that the seeds probably need to be kept in a cool environment. I've kept my seeds in a container and in my fridge before, and that's helped my seeds. I haven't kept seeds in a freezer, but definitely the refrigerator in a nice container. And I've even kept seeds in a cabinet here, like I keep my spices.
Fatima, I'll jump in too. I also save seeds in my refrigerator, not my freezer, but I like to use, those little silica packets. I like to throw those in to help manage moisture so that they don't get too damp and potentially rot in my fridge. Not that I have a super moist fridge, but moisture can potentially undermine any sort of seed saving. So it's something to think about. Also, I have heard like a darker space for seeds, so it feels like it's dormant, right, is also helpful to seed saving too.
Okay, and then there's one other question about cucumber and beans. Some folks are just curious what varieties you were growing last year.
Last year, I did an English cucumber, so long and thin, and draped it over just a makeshift trellis to the back of my garden. And they were hanging in between my flowers and plants. I had to go in and search for them. And the beans, instead of just the regular short green beans, they were like this long. I would have to go look at the packet. I don't remember the name. It's something I've never planted before. So I would say just research it and look for different varieties of variances. And some of them may say disease resistant. And I would just say experiment. There's so many different types. I just looked in my book where one of the companies I order from, and I'm going to do a purple green bean this year. And it's a different variety I've never planted before. And I chose it because it said disease resistant. And who knows, it's an experiment.
That's great. Well, I think those are all the questions that we have from this morning's talk. So Kristen and Fatima, thank you so much for this excellent second presentation on vegetable gardening. Again, for any of you folks who are on the line today who might have missed part 1, that's also going to be available on our website along with this recording of part 2. So feel free to just swing back over to mgnv.org and check that out. So wanted to just wish you all really good luck with planning and getting started with your vegetable gardening. And we look forward to seeing you all at some more of these upcoming sessions on Zoom. And until next time, have a great weekend.